In this class and the classes that follow, we will talk about privacy and law enforcement. When it comes to enforcing the law and investigating crime, government surveillance has both good and some very problematic attributes. First, the good things about surveillance. One thing that surveillance can do is that it can control behavior. It can stop people from engaging in crime or other bad behavior. Surveillance is also a very important tool to investigate crime. But surveillance has a dark side. It can cause some severe problems. One of the best accounts to describe the problems of government surveillance is the classic novel by George Orwell, 1984. The novel depicts a terrifying totalitarian society where government controls every facet of individuals' lives. The government engages in massive surveillance and has an array of technologies that it uses to watch everything that the people do. Everywhere, posted on buildings and walls, are posters saying, "Big Brother is watching you." As they're watching their TVs, the government is watching them. Orwell's 1984 depicts a very drab world, a scary world, where any step out of line results in strict discipline. People are inhibited. They are completely unfree. They can't be themselves. They live in this cold, gray, oppressive world. This is what happens when government surveillance is uncontrolled. Surveillance can inhibit freedom. In 1791, the philosopher Jeremy Bentham came up with a design for a prison. Now, if you think about prisons, normally you've seen prisons and they have long corridors and the cells are all along the corridors, and as the guards walk by, they can look into each cell and see if the inmates are up to no good. But then they walk to another cell and they walk down the hallway. Well, when they're not looking, someone could be doing something bad. Bentham's design tried to address this problem. He architected a prison that was circular, and there would be a central observation tower, and the cells would be arrayed around the tower. Here's what a modern version of a panopticon looks like. The guards would watch from the tower, and from the tower they could see into each and every cell. The prisoners, knowing that they could be watched at all times, would obey. They would be totally disciplined. The great efficiency of the panopticon is that the central tower can be obscured. Actually, no one needs to be in the tower after a while. The prisoners wouldn't know, but they'd always be fearful that they could be under surveillance. Many years later, the philosopher Michel Foucault used Jeremy Bentham's concept of the panopticon to describe the modern surveillance state. He argued that the surveillance was turning us all into inmates, and it was chilling behavior. If people are afraid that the government could be watching them, they might be more inhibited about how they can act. They might not express themselves as freely. They might not do all the things that they want to do. They might not engage in protests. They might not read or consume ideas in the full way that they would actually want to do. They will be a little bit more concerned if they engage in any behavior that's slightly outside the norm. The problem with excessive government surveillance is that it not only stops illegal and deeply troubling behavior, but it also stops legal, lawful, legitimate behavior. It chills people from being their true selves. Another problem with government surveillance is the potential for abuse. This is often captured with the saying, "Who is watching the watchers?" Because those that watch and that gather information can use it to attack people. Surveillance can be abused when the government doesn't like certain people, puts them under surveillance, but actually doesn't find what they're actually looking for, but they find something else. And then they use that to go after people that they don't like. History bears out this concern. J. Edgar Hoover, who headed the FBI from the 1930s to the 1970s, was a massive abuser of surveillance power. He put countless people under surveillance: celebrities, famous people, athletes, inventors, scientists, even politicians, even people in Congress, Supreme Court justices, and the President of the United States. He had dossiers on several major historical figures: Albert Einstein, Thomas Mann, John Steinbeck, Ernest Hemingway, Arthur Miller, William Faulkner, Charlie Chaplin, Muhammad Ali, and many others. He had a massive collection of files on everybody. He actually instructed his secretary to destroy all of this immediately upon his death, which she did. But the worst, most abusive instance of surveillance was his surveillance of Martin Luther King Jr. For some reason, J. Edgar Hoover hated Martin Luther King. He believed that Martin Luther King was a communist, which wasn't true. He put Martin Luther King under a massive amount of surveillance. He didn't discover any evidence that Martin Luther King was a communist, but he did find out evidence that King was having an affair. And so the FBI sent King a letter with tapes of the recordings, and the letter basically said that the FBI would reveal this to the public unless King killed himself. All of this information came out after J. Edgar Hoover's death. Congress investigated the activities of the FBI and released a very detailed report of all of it. This report is called the Church Committee Report. It's too simple just to say, well, let's just ban all government surveillance. The government needs to engage in surveillance. We must have law enforcement. We can't take this very essential law enforcement tool away. That's where the law comes in. The role of the law isn't just to stop surveillance or allow all surveillance. It's to try to create a balance. It's to try to allow for the surveillance, but to put it under control, to make sure there's adequate oversight and there's adequate restrictions or guardrails about it. This is what the law is going to try to do. What we're going to talk about in the next few classes is how the law attempts to do this and whether it does it well.